Well, everyone, we have special guest Darby here with us today, and she's going to tell us her story and her story about the book she is writing, which is super exciting. I worked with Darby at Aurora's Apothecary when I was there reading and doing all the tarot things. And I remember, Darby, when you sat across from me at the table doing your reading, I took one look at your chart and I was like, you're going to be famous. You're supposed to be famous.
Remember that.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So it was really fun to be able to do your reading, and then you started telling me a little bit more about your life, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, girl." Because she is a former reporter for NBC 26 News. She's a journalist, and now you're at the Fox Cities or Fox Valley Performing Arts Center, which is amazing, and I think you're doing your first show there, aren't you?
Not there. So I'm doing a lot of things with administration there, and then I'm
Uh-huh.
involved at Green Bay Community Theater. I'm in my first production out there, so that's very exciting. We open next week.
Ooh, that is exciting. Yes. So you get your toes dabbled in all of these little things. And for all of us numerology peoples and everybody that's in the group, Darby is a 10 of clubs, and the 10 of clubs is the frequency of fame. So the 10 of clubs tends to find their place in front of people often. It's just kind of where the world leads them, and they have a hell of a story. And Darby's is a pretty freaking incredible one. And I think this book is going to be life-changing for a lot of people. And so that's why I wanted you to come on and share a little bit of it with us. And I will give you the floor and tell us a little bit more about you and what you're doing and all of the goodness.
Well, thank you. I didn't super prepare anything because I wanted this to be extemporaneous. I wanted us to have a real good flow of conversation. So, too, I know you said everybody mute themselves, but if you can't help it, if you got a question, like I welcome that. I'm very feedback oriented. When I was a reporter, in fact, that was something that I kind of like to think I was known for. Was I didn't come in with a story in mind, trying to fish for the right soundbite. I came in wanting to gather as much information as I could, truly find the story and tell it as best as I could. And natural transition there, doing that for other people for long enough kind of taught me how to tell stories in general. Um, Not that I wasn't. I mean, some of my earliest memories, I remember being like 5 years old, sitting in the back seat of the car with journals, and I would write short stories and poems and plays that were not any good, and just writing. So, and then in going through school all the time, people would tell me, "Oh, you're going to be a politician or a lawyer or a journalist or something," because I'm always around people talking and learning and writing. So, what people didn't know back then when I was getting positively reinforced to write is that I was already living a story. And what I didn't know back then was that it would be one that I was going to tell. So, I grew up in a split household. My parents divorced when I was young. And my dad's side of the family, I won't really emphasize too much. They were pretty traditional. They were really good people. I still have a good relationship with them. But they did not know anything that was going on while I was at my mom's house. And that's where a lot of the things that I'm writing about happened. So, um, my mom married a man when I was young who, brought us into the Mormon faith. And I took to it immediately. I lommed right on. There was a lot of spirituality involved. There was just this sense, too, there was this energy. And a lot of things about sometimes when I tell these stories, I acknowledge too, it's hard for me to know where the line between traditional Mormonism begins and ends and where what I grew up in begins and ends, because they started to break away. They started to decide that they were hearing the true word of God and the Mormon church was straying, right? So they would do things like the laying on of hands ceremony, which I have since, at least in a Google search, found out the main Mormon church doesn't traditionally do that so much anymore. And I don't know when that stopped. But in my upbringing, that was a big piece. And that and in the years since, kind of to tell my story out of order, I've learned about things like Reiki and energy work, and it's very similar, if not the same thing by another name, to what I was experiencing when I was young. And that's a theme that in this podcast I think is really interesting to explore, is how things like growing up at that house, there were quartz crystals all over. I mean, we would break open rocks and there'd be quartz inside, and I didn't know that that was any kind of spiritual energy magnifier or anything. But um, I've had friends who would come around and visit back then, who we've compared notes now that I'm older, and they said there was just this energy in that house. I understand why it was confusing, because I would come over and it was just, there would be something. Um, so, as I've alluded, we grew up in a faith that then they broke away from, and it was very intermingled spirituality. And then my mom and my stepdad decided that they would do things that no parent should ever do to their children. I was singled out. My stepdad told me that he spoke directly to God, and that God told him that I was to be his sister wife, or that I was to be his wife, that my mom was to be my sister wife. Um, there is this misconception that all of Mormonism does that. That's not true. That's not something that they all do. But that is something that my stepdad picked up on and ran with. And because my faith was so strong, and because I had grown up truly believing in this, it's to the point where it wasn't belief anymore, it was knowledge in my mind. Um, I didn't feel right about it. Um, but I thought God would never ask me to do something that I couldn't handle. And I thought this was coming from God. So I accepted. And that's something that's really hard. That was really hard to live with for a while too, because a common manipulation tactic, a common trick that these people have, is they make things feel like they're your choice, that they're your decision. And so I sat there with this guilt about it being my fault for years when things would happen. But I did eventually break away. And I took years to process that. And in those years, I fell into these cycles. I started to notice I was being drawn to similar types of people. I started to notice that even though I was out of there, I didn't quite understand what PTSD was yet. And I was experiencing what I now know were like flashbacks and episodes. And sometimes what that experience is like isn't exactly like in the movies. It's not the big deal things. The example that I give all the time, and I give this example in my book too, is that I was at the movies once, and it was a comedy, and one of the characters was wearing a pair of pajama bottoms, and I hadn't seen that exact pair of pajama bottoms since I was like 11 or 12, and he was the one who was wearing them. And that just set me off emotionally, and so for the next couple of days I was like emotionally sick. Not like crying and screaming and banging my head, just like slow to process things, really inside my head. So anyway, there's a lot of things that have happened along the way, a lot of very specific details. And people have wanted to know those details. They've told me they wanted me to write a book. They've had a lot of questions. And I felt like I should write it, but I didn't know what was the right time. I didn't know that I'm alive. My story is constantly unfolding. When do I write this? Well, I wound up finally telling my dad about everything when I was in college. And he did not rush me, but encouraged me to seek legal action. We got a private detective. We got together a case. It took a really long time. We went to court. It is currently the 8-year anniversary of that trial. It was a jury trial. And then by the end of it, the jury hung because they couldn't figure out what verdict to give. 6 said guilty, 6 said not guilty. And there's some nuance to that too, because not guilty doesn't mean they definitely aren't guilty. Not guilty just means we can't say beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because these people who raised me and manipulated me were so skilled at planning ahead that there was not a whole lot of physical evidence, just testimony. So that was hard. And I didn't want that to be where I ended my book either, because I continued to learn and grow after that. So I've been writing it. I've written things upon reflection that I've learned. I've written things as I remember them happening with as much evidence to back it up as I can. I write it narratively so that it's engaging, and it's I include cute memories too, so it's not a slog. It's not heavy the whole way through. Um, I've read a few memoirs. I love Jeanette McCurdy's "I'm Glad My Mom Died." Um, the original tell-all, "Mommy Dearest," I think is very bold and brave in what it does, but it's just heavy. It is a constant slog. It is bad thing after bad thing after bad thing, and she doesn't really learn anything, and she never really gets free of her mother's influence. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do. So what I think I have done is I outline what the legal process is and can look like for people who want to seek their justice and have, need realistic expectations. I think what I do is I provide the insight that comes from there. I told you she's my dog. I'm so sorry. 1 second. I provide insight into what I've learned from being in that position. I try not to condemn any of the religions or the spiritual things that I experience along the way, because that's an easy trap to fall into. Um, and I don't make myself out to look like a total saint in my victimhood either, because I made mistakes along the way. There were I don't know that there's things you can do right or wrong. But if I was like a fake movie character or book character, there I would have been written differently to be a better character at times. And just kind of want to paint that picture because I think it can be healing for people. There was this name back when I was still indoctrinated in all of this. There was a woman named Elizabeth Smart who was stolen out of her window in the middle of the night. She lived in Salt Lake City. And this man and this woman told her that God told them that she was supposed to be their wife. And they stole her out of her window, and she lived with them, and that all happened to her. But then she escaped. She took them to court, and it became this big mainstream story. And hearing from her, hearing about her, was the first time I allowed myself to start to think, maybe I'm not being told the truth. Obviously, I didn't process it. It wasn't immediate, but it was a seed. And if I can be that for even one other person, I have fulfilled my purpose. Does
I
that make
mean,
sense?
yeah, yeah, it does. And yeah, I remember Elizabeth Smart and how amazing everything lines up. Like, oh, you had like everything is just like a snowball as we go through and divine timing and all these wonderful things. And I remember when we were at the shop, we were talking about like our life and stuff like that. Because I think I explained a little bit to you about how like per the charts, you're like my ideal client because like I have lived certain things that would have correlated with your life. And I know we started talking about our moms, and then you were like, my mom tried to sell me. I was like, oh, I feel like you may be teaching me a little.
Well, and that's kind of so my mom tried to sell me as kind of oversimplifying it. So my stepdad was a bad person, and my brother and I both grew up there, and we've got split memories of things because they were very good at compartmentalizing what went on in that house. No, none of the kids, unless they were paying attention and they were kind of encouraged not to, knew what happened to each other. There was this hierarchy, and we were constantly scrabbling. I mean, it was. Have you ever heard of that phrase, like crabs in a bucket?
Mhm.
It was crabs in a bucket in there. Everybody was trying to get ahead of everybody, so no one was doing well. But even beyond that, there was this age thing. Like the older you were, you got the food first. You were the preferential treatment, and if you were a boy, preferential treatment over the girls. So I was kind of special. I was marked special because I was a girl, and I wasn't even the oldest girl, and I was treated like the older boys, which I would find out later psychologically makes your siblings less inclined to care about you or want to check in on you because they see you as privileged. And but so my brother anyway, he experienced some things too. I don't tell his story. That's not my place.
Mhm.
But we have um, talked, and he said he was much closer to my mom. I was close to my stepdad until obviously context changed all of that, which is another very complex thing to process.
Mhm.
Is you have these memories that are tied up in emotion, and they can be pleasant and they can be like formative. I love sci-fi. I love movies, and he's the person who introduced me to those things. That's very difficult.
Mhm.
Or I'll have a good memory, and then like with context, the way that things were phrased or the way that things went down, he suddenly realized was a little bit more nefarious than than you would have known at the time. But my brother said that she told him she was worried about my my mom told my brother she was worried about him and his well-being. So she, in his memory, offered me up to my stepdad as like a sacrifice, like do whatever you want to her. Just leave this kid alone. And since I didn't experience that firsthand, that is not in my book. I don't, because I can't say for sure that that happened. I'm very careful about that. Everything I include is either something I experienced firsthand, or I qualify by saying this was said, but I have this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence, this piece of evidence to back it up.
Yeah.
Um, so it's sort of like she sold me, but it was also there was something not right with her because inappropriate relationships with family members was a theme for her. And I think, and this is where you get into the humanity of a person and you say, well, probably something was wrong with her relationship with her dad. Like that guy probably was not a good guy and probably did do something, maybe not as far gone as what I went through, but who knows? Because she will never tell. But that doesn't excuse continuing the cycle, right? So just because I've been through what I've been through, I would never, ever pass this on to any of my children if I ever had them. You know, that's tough. And one thing I do acknowledge though is that like the cycle of victimhood is one I started to fall into until I identified it.
Mhm.
And that's not easy. First of all, identifying it is harder than people make it sound out to be. And second of all, just because it's the first step doesn't mean that you do anything about it afterwards.
Right. That's true.
It's uncomfortable. Growth is so uncomfortable, and your pride gets so hurt along the way. And then when you're on the other side of it and life isn't just magically healed, you know, it's not the happily ever after at the end of the movie. You're like, well, that's not fair.
Yeah.
All I wanted was to be normal, and it turns out being normal means struggling with other things in your day to day.
Yeah.
But there's something I think hopeful in that. And I really want to capitalize on that too. I know what I'm telling is like heavy stuff. And I have also learned over the years to be careful how I talk about it because I've had a lifetime to process it. But the people I tell my story to, it's like the first time they're hearing it. So it's a lot at once. And that was why, too, I'm fundraising right now because even though I've written this book, I want, maybe this is the journalist in me, but I want 100% accuracy where it's possible. And so I have not written the courtroom scenes because I want word for word. I want to be able to tie themes in. I want to be able to correlate because there are narratives that they chose to use. There are lies that they made up. There are things they claimed, and I don't want them to have the chance to say I made it up or that I spun anything. I will have the document and I will put it right there. I mean, I'll write it like it's dialogue. I won't just put the transcript in the middle. That would be, clunky. Um, but that document is really expensive, and I'll get into why in a second. So I've been fundraising for it, and it's been tricky to do that, right? Because you say this is this big heavy reason why I'm fundraising, but it's kind of like, hi, you've never met me before. Here's my blood type. Please give me money. I promise it's worth it. And I'm not experienced at asking for things in general, so this is a big ask. But side note, as of this morning, if I combine my Venmo donations and GoFundMe donations, I have hit $6,300 total.
Ooh.
Yes, and when I say that's actually inaccurate. We have done that.
Yeah.
We have done that. I think we're up to like 60 something donors now. That is incredible, incredible support. Um, I'm constantly afraid people think I'm taking it for granted. I need it to be so known.
Mhm.
Ugh, and it's just validation because I know that this is important and I know this is something I'm going to do. But then this is a way of finding out from other people. We agree. We want to hear it. We
Yeah.
know that we know that it's important.
And that's
Um,
what the universe does when
yes,
you are supposed to be doing something. It's all about that wonderful energetic exchange, right? You open
yes.
up to the possibility of it and look at where it's going and how fast, right?
Oh my gosh.
Poof.
Yeah, I started the fundraiser in August,
Hmm.
and you honestly coming and see. I'm going to give you a little plug here because sitting with you and talking to you, I don't know if you remember this. I didn't mention I was writing a book. You told me I was. It was like one of the first things you said to me. It was like, "You're writing something. You need to finish it. People need to hear you." And I was like,
Oh my
my
gosh.
jaw was on the ground. I was like, "I am. I have not told anybody this. That's wild." And then I went through again that whole everything happens for a reason. I went through a relationship that was not right, and you also called that. But what that relationship did for me was it was somebody who I had known for 10 years. I just didn't know him. And he kind of pushed me to share some of my writing with him. And I'm such a loud, bold, outspoken person. You would maybe not guess this, but when it comes to my writing, I'm so shy and I keep it to myself. I don't want you to read it till it's perfect. And so I probably never would have gotten to a place where I was starting to share this
Hmm.
because you get in your own head and it's never going to be perfect because it's not a perfect story. It's a human story. Um, that was pearls before swine. He didn't appreciate it at all. But he is the person who got the ball rolling on talking about it, on sharing it, on letting people read it. I got some beta readers after that. I started to seek I started this fundraiser publicly because that had put some wind in my sails. So all of these people along the way too, and you are a big piece of this, have encouraged me um, and reaffirmed something that I think, not even I think, that I know and have known deep inside of me for a while was important. I've just been kind of waiting for permission. I've been waiting for a sign or for the time. And it's funny because while I have been given that, I did have to seek it to find it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all about taking the steps. And I remember in your session saying, listen, let go of the perfectionism.
And I probably made the same face I just did.
Yeah.
Stop clocking me.
That was one of the big things I remember from our session was telling you that. And like, I vaguely, because a lot of that stuff when it comes through for me when I'm doing sessions with people, I channel it through. And so after the session, I'm like, I don't remember a lot of what I said, unless I'm like back into your chart or whatever it is. But that was the one thing that I remember. I do remember talking about the relationship, but I remembered seeing that in your chart too, that it was like a trigger of something. I vaguely remember that. And it was so amazing because that was when you said, after you told me that you were like writing a book, I get these chills, right? And I get them from head to toe. And I had had them so strong. I felt like the hair on the top of my head was like standing up. And I was like, you got to do this. You need to be doing this. And I think I remember at Aurora's, I might have told you, or I was thinking it, like, you're not going to be here long. You're not going to be here forever. You're going to be doing something big. Yeah.
Well, what's funny is I had been, as we said, I had been a journalist. I moved here because I wanted to do the on-air thing. I loved my time in Nashville at the station where I was, good friends, great people, and I wasn't bad at what I was doing, but it was behind the scenes and it was just like in this basement, no windows. I was a digital content producer, which is an important part of any newsroom, and some shade to my former coworker or my former workplace. If you don't acknowledge the importance of that, it becomes very evident. But just because I was good at it and saw that it was important and loved the people there didn't mean it was fulfilling. And I kind of went out on a limb and I said, I want to talk to people, interact with people, be out in the field. And so the parent company that owned that station also owned NBC 26 in Green Bay. I went through a few rounds of interviewing. They were like, we think you'd be great for on air. We think this would be a good match for you. And so even though, like, and then I got there and it wasn't what we thought it was going to be, and it wound up not being right. And then I had this little period of time where I was between jobs and I found my way to Aurora's and I met you. And that's just more of that things happening for a reason. And you may not understand it at the time.
No.
I was distraught because I had gotten my degree in journalism and I had sort of like invested in this as my path. And I had never like really settled in on something like that before. I'd tried college before, but even getting good grades in something wasn't enough for me to see it being my future. And I wasn't willing to invest in the things that weren't sure things. I loved acting, but I couldn't make myself get that as a degree. I love writing, but I couldn't make myself get that as a degree. And so I picked what I thought was practical. And just like that speech from Jim Carrey forever ago, where he's like, you should go for the thing you care about because the thing you don't care about isn't a sure thing either. And that's not to say I don't care. I mean, I really did care about what I was doing, but this isn't a session about the industry because I can ramble about that for a while.
We'll do a part two for that
Yeah. But
one.
having gone through that, I think was a catalyst to get me here. Is the short version of all of that long version. Is I think that everything I experienced, I was meant to experience, added to my empathy, gave me context for the world I'm living in, and at the same time, I probably would have been so stubbornly loyal to something that was wrong for me that I had to be forced out. And so Aurora's was where I went when I was sort of like, I just need to be out in the public, interacting with people again. Um, I went in because I'd had a bad visit from a friend and I wanted to sage my house. And I hadn't saged my house since moving here. And the person I met there, I got this like crazy connection with. And I asked if they were hiring. And like the next day, I was in communication with the right people. And there I was. And they had a location up in Fish Creek. For anyone listening, I think everyone listening is from Wisconsin, so knows this. But in case someone isn't, it's like vacation. It's like a little vacation spot.
Hmm.
People go there to relax, and I was like, well, they're asking me if I'll drive up there and tend this store, and then just have the evenings to wander around and walk along the shoreline and observe people. This is the perfect time to finish my writing because at that point the book wasn't. It had been started, but it hadn't been finished. And so that gave me the time and the space and the opportunity to do that. But I always knew going in that it wasn't a place I wanted to be forever either.
Hmm.
And then when you told me that, I didn't blink at that too much. I was like, yeah, that seems right. That's about right. I didn't know where I was going next. I had no idea I'd wind up at the Performing Arts Center, and I love it there. Really, really great people. Could not say enough how great those people are there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And Kim too, we all kind of swarmed in at once, like all of
Mhm.
us. And then we formed this whole little community, and every single person that has jumped in there has done something really incredible or supported somebody. And I
Oh.
was going through all the charts and I was like, oh, yep, here we all are. And every single person that was there, we're all actually a part of each other's soul family in the numerology. Like we've all been together over on wherever we are, right? So it was totally divinely guided. And your book with the trials and all of that stuff, what comes to me is how was your mom before she met this person?
She's a tricky subject. If I was to write a fiction novel, I would base a character on her. She's so fascinating to me. Um, she's a psychology professor. She met my birth dad because they were getting their PhDs at George Mason for psychology. Um, I think she is a brilliant woman, but for example, she used to tell my dad that she would be the perfect candidate for a cult because she's so easily swayed. So vaguely self-aware, and I think probably undiagnosed mental disorders, which I'm neither saying that a person is automatically anything because of that, but I'm
Hmm.
also saying it's important to become self-aware and then know what to do about that. And I think she was one of those women who, because she studied it, she was afraid of a label and thought she could outsmart the label. So she was never officially diagnosed with anything, but if I had to guess, I would say borderline personality disorder, maybe bipolar. And I would say I don't know if she's fully narcissistic, but there's some tendencies there at least. And so what happened was she would like also she's very tied up. Her identity is very tied up in her sexuality and in the men that want her. So I think she was always going to be a good candidate for somebody like my stepdad, who his name is Charles. Charles and Nancy are these two people's names. I think Charles saw a vulnerable woman who would be easily manipulated, and he knew what to validate and what to take down, and just kind of made things worse. I also struggle too because my dad is my birth dad, my actual dad, is very secular. Um, my spirituality journey kind of, we don't really talk about it. Um, Astrology, he kind of rolls his eyes at playfully, so I downplay those things. And so I also kind of have a foot in each camp. I try to be careful to be like, can things work rationally without a spiritual explanation, and can things work with a spiritual explanation? I try to ride the line, but there are sometimes there are things that it's just like I don't know how to explain without this piece.
Right.
And I think that she did see things, and so from a secular perspective, hallucinations, right, and from a spiritual perspective, angels and demons. But she would describe these things that she saw, and she would let him interpret them for her. And she would let him speak over her, and she was very prone to jealousy. I think she always wanted to be a boy mom, and so when I came out, not only a girl but a girl who looked like her, and then I was identified gifted in kindergarten, she was immediately comparing herself against me. She immediately was jealous of me. She did not like me. So it is hard to have an objective perspective on her because my lens, and I didn't know this until years later with context, because you're born, you love your mom.
Mm-hmm.
That's your mom. And I loved her. All I wanted was her validation and her approval. Um, and there are things that are very genetically her that are in me. I have her skin. I definitely have her face, like some of my movements. She was always charismatic. I have bold memories of like just being in line at the gas station waiting to pay for gas, and she'd get every stranger in that line laughing and talking to each other. I mean, really. And I like to think I picked up on some of that, and that's
Mm-hmm.
from her. But I think that she had some pride issues, and so acknowledgement of anything being wrong was something she couldn't do, which is sometimes and often tied up in borderline personality too, where you have to rewrite the story so that you are always in the right. And I think that was kind of her downfall. And that's also where I've come around to the philosophy in analyzing her and in everything I've been through and how I got out of things. I think truth is a tonic, even if it's an uncomfortable one sometimes. And
Mm-hmm.
so being honest with ourselves, but in also being honest in our assessment of the world around us and asking for feedback and learning who you can trust and trying and failing and not always getting it right away. But I think that, and I kind of say this in my book too, and I've got a chapter of reflections, and I say something to the effect of like, I want to sit under a tree and know peace. I want to have my quiet moments and have my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And even if a jury of my peers couldn't decide what was true, at the end of the day, they know and I know. And that means I get to know peace. And I don't know that they ever will.
So as you're talking about this, I'm getting the chills again, my thing. I think this book is that this book I think is going to be that validation that you've been looking for, that people are going to come out of the woodwork and have something to say and support you. And okay, the real thing that's really coming to me is giving you that love that you want, giving you that specialness, and like it's a reciprocal thing because you're helping change other people's lives, right?
Yes.
But they're helping change yours. That is what this is. This is your book is kind of like the bridge for all
Mm,
of it, I feel like. And I
that's
think,
what I want.
yeah.
Life's about connection for me.
Hmm.
That's a really big, I mean, that's who I've always been.
Hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes misguided, sometimes getting it wrong, but yeah, connecting people.
Hmm.
And it's really cool that it's important to me that I don't do things because they will be helpful to me,
Hmm.
but it's also important that the things that I do are good
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
That's a tightrope. I was raised in a lot of humility culture, and I think anyone who is blanket Christian, not just Mormon, not just cult, but like any blanket Christian, understands that we are taught humility. But sometimes that message gets layered on a little thick to where some kinds of pride are bad, but then you get to a point where any amount of pride that is righteous or that is good or deserved, you are taught to reclassify as bad, and you get to the point where you're afraid to accept good things and afraid to, and healing from that is an ongoing process, let me tell you. And
And
I
I,
know I'm not alone in that. And that's the thing too with a lot of these. I try to say people fall into this trap of hearing how wild my story is, and then it will make them want to open up and tell me things about themselves, which is great, right? I mean, it's not, I'm sorry that we both suffered in different ways and sometimes in like specific ways, but to give it purpose, to give it the good spin, it means that I can show someone they're not alone. And in return, they can do that for me when they're reaching out. Because sometimes, you know, you go long enough without hearing from someone and you think, oh, is there anyone like me in the world? Like, will I ever have friends or partners or whatever? And yes, we all will. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I forget where I was going. I just that was a really important thing for me is oh, comparing. A lot of times people get caught up in this comparison. They'll share their story and they'll say, "But it's nothing like what you went through." And I'm like, "Stop. Please don't do that." Because your brain has no concept of scale. I've never experienced what you've experienced. For all I know, what you went through would have been harder on me than what I went through because when I signed up for this life, this is the path I was given. I
Yeah.
wasn't given your path. So
Mhm.
what you went through that you think isn't as bad or you think I'm going to tell you isn't that hard. I don't know that. I haven't experienced it and I don't know if I ever will. But
Yeah.
that's not the point. The point isn't comparing what's harder. The point is finding the ways to overcome it. And sometimes, you know, like overcoming the trauma of a lost loved one can have the same methods as overcoming the trauma of like basing your whole life on a falsehood. You know, it's
Mhm.
you don't know until you start talking. And that's another thing too, communication. I think there are a lot of people in this world who can relate to what I went through, but anyone who believed, it's hard for them to readjust. And so a lot of them, their lives, they don't make it, or they just stay in it. And I think I'm unique because not only did I make it out, but my unique skill set involves communication and writing.
Yeah. Yes, it does. You know, as a society, we are all taught that you give somebody a gift, right?
Mhm.
You're getting a gift, you should be really excited, right? But most of us are like, oh gosh, I'm not deserving of this. I'm not, like even a compliment. We don't know how to accept any of that.
That's that humility thing. Yeah, you're afraid.
Yeah.
You're taught. You know, it's if you accept it the wrong way, then it was bad, and it's very
Mhm.
black and white thinking. And no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, we
no.
all need to learn to accept the good things. And that same thinking, I think, blocks us a lot from our purpose because we don't think we deserve all the wonderful things that are there for us. So we don't live up to our like full potential.
And then that's reinforced. That whole
Yeah.
like trope of like you don't know you're beautiful. That's what makes you beautiful.
Mhm.
No, no. My favorite response to a compliment, it hasn't always been. This has been like me cultivating my audacity. I love when someone says, "Hey, my friend thinks you're cute," and I say, "Thanks, your friend's right." You know,
I love that.
because either they have to agree with you and it's good-hearted, or they said it because they didn't think you were cute and they thought that you would appreciate that compliment. And then like, hey, that's actually insulting.
Right.
So no, give me a compliment you mean and don't expect anything from it, and I'll tell you you were right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're so deserving and we block ourselves even from those small little things like somebody telling us we're cute. We're like, oh, no, no.
Yeah,
You think about it, even in relationships, your husband or significant other is like, oh, you're sexy. And you're sitting there in like
like
the
you have
rattiest
pictures.
shirt. Yeah. And you're
Oh
like,
yeah,
what?
yeah. You're like in with the cheese on it.
Yeah. Hair's like in a rat and you're stuffing stuff into your face and your crumbs falling out. What?
Yeah.
You never look sexier right now. Are you kidding me? Yeah. But it does. It takes a toll on us. And then I can only imagine you being able to make the shift out of one mindset into like this whole different world and then stepping into the spiritual part of it. And then most people even stepping into the spiritual part, your whole world just kind of like implodes for a minute. 'Cause
Well, the
like,
spiritual part is still so hard to talk about. I
mhm,
often, when people hear my story, their first question is like, "Do you still believe in God?" Because getting out of that, you have to untrain a lot. I've got people who I'm afraid to say the like different um, paths I've traveled in discovering, what I experience and think and believe, because I know that there are some people are just closed minded,
mhm.
and I don't want to turn them off to hearing all the other good things because they think that this or that buzzword makes you crazy or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's a piece that I'm grateful that I'm having this setting to talk to you because
Mhm.
it's still that's a bold piece of me that I'm still kind of like, our journeys are never over, right? I'm still kind of figuring that one out. Not I'm a little bit more every day internally, but there's like a lag on externally, what I'm sharing.
Yeah, and spiritual work is very internal anyways.
Mhm.
Nobody's going to experience it the way that you experience it, and that's why it's that kind of work. So even sharing it, sometimes the things that have clicked or that you have, say you have like this extreme experience in meditation or whatever it is, nobody's going to experience it the same way. So it's very internal. It can be very lonely work. And so when you're trying to spit it out and like explain it to somebody,
Yeah.
it's
And
like,
if I do it wrong, then what if I've ruined your chances of ever like, that's not true. That's just my catastrophizing brain. It's like,
right.
I don't
Yeah.
want to ruin it for you.
Oh my gosh. But, in hearing you speak from the spiritual aspect, I can see where all of this has pushed you into wanting to learn that knowledge and having knowledge of all these different ways of believing and thinking and everything to be able to formulate like your own thing. Because, you're here to speak and teach and change people's minds and produce something new, right? So you have all these little journeys leading up to something that you just in yourself, it's a beautiful viewpoint of it, you know? So some of that has fueled you here, and we're never done learning, obviously.
Mm-mm.
So,
I
but
am the child of educators. I
yeah,
am everything is a lesson. And I love theater and all the world's a stage. So this is a giant improv class all the time.
yeah, it can be it can be really hard to show up though, even if we're out in front of the camera, right? Doing
Mhm.
whatever to authentically show up as us.
Oh, and that's that truth piece.
Yeah.
Truth is bold. And it's not just words, it's actions. And it's internal looping with yourself and it's you with your spiritual self. I
Mm,
mean, truth is a tonic and it doesn't apply in just one place.
right. Yeah.
And also just because I understand that doesn't mean I apply it all the time.
Oh,
But
no,
we're
none of
getting
us
there.
do.
No.
It's a constant battle of better too.
Ah, I am my own mother and my own child.
Yeah, that's basically how it is. Like, ugh, I know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this?
Yeah. Let me say it out loud to someone so I'm held accountable for it.
Yeah, yeah, basically. So, when you knew you had to get out of the situation, what did that look like for you? Like, when did that start brewing? When was it like, I'm out of here?
So, oh God, that's a great question, and I get that one too. It was a slow boil. Um, we were taught that doubt was a sin, and I tried, my perfectionism. I tried to be perfect, so if I a doubt of anything slipped in, no, 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 no. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and I'd pray and I'd pray and I'd pray for forgiveness. Um, but I think after the Elizabeth Smart trial, it was the first doubt that I felt, and I was like, let me start to keep track of things. They told me that God would report back to them whenever I did anything that was bad, and I just believed that. But then I would start to do things like I would interact with friends at school, and I'd say little things here and there that I'm not supposed to say, and then I would never hear about it from them. Or I would do something a little sneaky, not anything crazy, um, but just little things that in our biome would have been wicked, and in the rest of the world would have been normal. Um, and they wouldn't notice, or God wouldn't tell them. You know, so it would start to creep up, but then that felt like a sin because this is everything you've ever believed. I just remember I couldn't take it anymore. I realized I was unhappy, I was uncomfortable, things weren't he used to make prophecies all the time and they would come true, but then like we hit a patch where I think he got a little too bold and he would say things like he would prophesy my mom's mom, my grandmother, was going to die any day now. She's still alive, by the way. He prophesied we were going to win the lottery. That never happened. Although when I won Wheel of Fortune, that one kind of threw me psychologically because I was like, oh, was this what he meant? Did he actually see that? I don't know. Um, he would prophesy like the end of the world was coming in 2012. I think that was a big thing when that didn't happen. But then he said, oh, it's not literal. Da, 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 da. You can always do the mental gymnastics. And
Hmm.
I think one thing I was really good for him in his creation of this cult was because I believed so devoutly, I would sort of do the mental gymnastics for him and he'd go, yeah, that's exactly right. And then use that. Um, I think as I got older, he started to know, he was smart enough to know that he needed to get out of there before I was bold enough to say something. So he moved to North Carolina. I lost his influence. I was floundering. I wasn't sure what to do or how to process. Um, and I was living with my mom in her apartment in a different state from her husband and the two older boys. And the thought was once I graduated high school, we'd all move out there and I would, if I went to college, it would be online and we'd be doing our thing together. And I just one day I realized I was like, even if this is wicked of me, even if this me losing my soul and falling into the ways of the world, I can't take this anymore. I'm gonna risk it. And God knows I've been devout this whole time and I've been praying this whole time and I've done everything he's asked of me, even when I wasn't comfortable. And he never gave me, in Mormonism, I don't know if this is everywhere, they talk about the burning in the bosom. Like your heart will get really warm and you'll receive confirmation. And I rarely got that. And I was always told that's because God was testing me. It was a challenge. He wanted to see how far my faith would take me without confirmation. And I said, it's just been long enough now that I haven't received confirmation. Maybe that's because it isn't right. And
Hmm.
so then I went a few years dabbling in this or that. And, you know, reading tarot was a big deal because that was super wicked, right? And I started to like play with different like pantheons of belief and test like saying different things out loud and kind of like creating my journey. And the whole time I was worried, like, what if that original one that I grew up on was right? And I choked at the 11th hour. It never really felt, for a long time, it never really felt like I had done the right thing. And that's what I think is so hard to convey. And that's a really hard sell for people who are in a bad situation is because, yeah, it's going to feel more comfortable short term to stay in the bad place than it is to get out. But there is, if you feel the call to get out, there is a reason. And I have lived enough life now that I can tell you it's not wickedness that called me away. It was wickedness that kept me trapped.
Yeah.
Does that, I know that's a really long answer, and that's because it's not cut and dry, but did that sort of answer what you were asking?
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. And I relate to that a lot. Like a lot of the things that you said, because we would rather live in our own hell because it's comfortable than move into the unknown,
You have to trust yourself. That's that truth piece again, just in a different way.
right?
Because whatever you believe in as your creator, if you call it God, if you call it the universe, if you call it spirit, and if you don't believe that anything created you and it's just your internal drive, you have to believe something is moving you along. There is purpose, whether self created or divine. And if that purpose is driving you to do something else, listen to that.
Yeah.
That's honesty. That's your truth.
Hmm. Absolutely, it is. Yep. So for like your trial, since we're speaking of truth, how long was the trial and how did that go for you?
So I think it was originally supposed to be 3, maybe 4 days with a jury verdict at the end of the week. It started on a Monday with pretrial motions. I gave my testimony for 2 days before we even got to defense because they had me testify and then get cross examined. And that's, I'm not, while I want my transcript, I am a little bit afraid of how emotionally I'm going to react to reading that over again.
I think that's going to be a
Um,
big healing.
that too.
Move through it. Hmm.
But it went on for a long time. It started, if I remember correctly, February 6th was the Monday of 2017. If I look back, I might be off by a day. And then I think the jury hung on Valentine's Day. So that would have been like a week and a half. Um, and the jury could not agree. It took them several days of deliberation. And the first day that they came back without a verdict, the judge asked, he said, um, do you think you're going to be unable to reach a decision? And the first juror said no. And the judge kind of paused. He said, I think you're confused. Let me try it again. If you keep going, you're saying it's possible that you could agree. And the juror said yes, because he wasn't willing to give up on me. There were some people in that jury box who were fighting for that guilty conviction for my parents. They were fighting for me. But ultimately, in the end, it was just there were minds that were made up on either side, and they could not be swayed. So, hung jury. And we thought we might gear up because when that happens, you can pursue a second trial. So my private detective, my defense attorney, they started to gather evidence to prepare for a second trial because some of the testimony that came out this time flat out lies that were verifiably untrue, but we didn't know they were going to make those things up. So if we went to a second trial, we were going to be prepared with all of the evidence to counteract their fake story. I was young. I didn't know how these things worked. And I was afraid still that I was going to be accused because a big piece that they said was that I was attention seeking, that because I was smart enough and I loved movies, that I was making this up so I could write a book, which is also why I didn't write for a long, long time, because I was afraid everyone would think, oh, well, then they were right. She made it up to write a book, but that's insane. I finally got old enough that I was like, that's insane. No one would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Not unless they are very deeply disturbed and there are other signs and symptoms of those people that I clearly do not exhibit. But they would say, like, she did theater, so she's an actress. Never mind the fact that my mom did too. That never came up. But I was just so terrified that no one would listen to or believe me, that I was willing to settle for anything. And I allowed us to offer a plea deal that did not give them any jail time, and so they're on the National Sex Offenders Registry, and they pled guilty. Like they said that they were guilty of these things. So like never again can they ever deny that. Innocent people don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to struggle with that being how it ended up, because that meant they got to keep raising my little half brother in that household. It meant that they got to, you know, carry on. But I do think, what if they had gone to jail and they'd harbored such resentment that they'd sent their kids after me to try to kill me? I don't know what would have happened. I do know, because this is what I have chosen to believe about most things in my life, it went the way it was supposed to. And because it went this way, and because they did not deny it, I mean, if we'd gone to a second trial and they'd been found guilty but didn't plead it, then they could have tried to deny it for the rest of their lives. But they can't deny it now. The way that this went, at least they are on the record saying, yes, we did these things. So there's pros and cons to it. Um, it's complicated. It's inherently complicated, as most things are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was a long drawn out process. I lost the food service job I was working at the time because they were like, if you don't work Valentine's Day, don't bother coming back. And I was like, well, my jury's deliberating. He's like, if you can't find cover, you have to be here. And I was like, I'm sorry. My life means more than this.
Right.
And then I found out later, like, they didn't even have that many people come in that Valentine's Day. So I definitely made the right choice, you know?
Right.
Um, yeah. It was the first time, too, that I'd seen them in person since leaving.
How was that?
That, I think, was the hardest part.
Yeah.
That made my gut turn over. And I didn't want them to have the satisfaction of seeing that. And I remember at one point, I get off the stand and we take a break and we go into the little, they set rooms aside for you to talk to your legal counsel. And I went into the one designated for us, and I just break down. I mean, I just start weeping. And my attorney, he was so sympathetic. I think it is an amazing person. But he just so gently, he says, why didn't you do that out there? And I said, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. And he said, yes, but the jury would have seen. And I think about that, because that's complicated too, because then, like, would they have thought that was more acting? There was no winning once someone pins you as an actor or as a liar. At that point in my life, I thought it was my responsibility to prove I wasn't. In actuality, it's somebody else's responsibility to identify the truth in you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have come across this. I have this philosophy that it's easier to convince an honest person of a lie than it is to convince a liar of the truth. Because when you live earnestly, you can just identify it. It's like this little silver light around a person. I didn't know that then because I hadn't lived my life among honest people for a while. I thought the whole world worked that the way that those liars had raised me. And some of the world does, but not everyone. And I'm also begging people who have that perspective to get out there, find whatever way you can to interact with real people because it's not as bad as the internet makes it seem. The internet's pretty bad sometimes, but it's also not all the way bad either.
Mm-hmm.
My GoFundMe would
Yeah,
not have happened without the internet. There's good out there.
I say that all the time. There's a lot of people that are stuck in the consistent bad day, that they are stuck in this loop of attracting the wrong people to them, and it's because they have gone through hell and back, but they just don't recognize it yet, right? And it takes a hot minute to be able to shift into the goodness, but there's so much wonderful, good things that are out there. And I think that does come back around to us being able to accept good things too and knowing we are deserving.
Yes.
I
And
think
I
that's
there's a poem that I love. I love, love, love. It applies to romantic relationships, I think is how it's originally written, but I think it also applies to the rest of the world. And it's very short. I think it's sorry if I'm remembering wrong. I think it's Shel Silverstein. But it goes, he had blue skin and so did she. She kept it hid and so did he. They looked for blue their whole life through and passed right by and never knew. Right? So it's scary when you think you're the only one with blue skin. You don't want to show it, but if you don't show it, then the other person who's afraid to show theirs won't know that you have that in common.
right.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I love that poem. I think about it a lot.
You should include that in your book.
I also have a quote from Anne Frank because the very first character I ever played was Anne Frank, and she says, "I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are really good at heart."
Yeah. Yeah.
I include that, and then I also the title may change, and if the title changes, I know what I think I want it to be, and there is a passage from the Book of Mormon that would give context to help understand that. So those are the three
Everything.
big pieces right now. Yeah. Plus, obviously the court transcript. But oh, that's another thing I meant to mention. Anyone who's sending energy or the praying sort, if you would keep the court reporter in mind. So my original court reporter from the trial died suddenly and unexpectedly, like
Oh,
in the course of 5 months, and so then she was replaced by a woman who is now she's been diagnosed with breast cancer and is undergoing chemo. So yes, she's said to stay in communication with her, and she knows that this is important to me. And I asked if it would be okay to pray for her, and she said that yes, she's trusting in God, and that's what she can do in situations like this. But
yeah.
I just think she's also a big part of my story because she's going to be part of the way that I obtain it, and she believes in me, and she knows that I'm at this point in the fundraiser, and um, she says that she recognizes because she's filled with purpose and she's got a mission in life too. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I just want to make sure her name's Angela. If we can send Angela love and light.
Definitely. All the
Mm-hmm.
Reiki vibes, all the love
Yes.
and light,
Yes.
100%. She sounds like she's an amazing woman.
From what I know, I have to agree.
Yeah. There's some really amazing people out there, and there's a lot of things that bad things happen to good people.
Mm.
It happens often, but I feel like, oh, go ahead.
There's a I forget which philosopher, but there's a great quote about that too. That's life begins on the other side of despair.
It does. Hmm. Even people with gifts, like spiritual gifts, stuff like that, oftentimes you have to have the rug pulled out from underneath you in order to get you to see.
Oh, landing on your butt hurts. It
It does.
hurts.
It
And
does.
then your feet are cold because you were used to that
Yeah.
rug.
Yeah. But I think we have to, I always say too, we have to have the bad in order to be able to say the good. And I think that plays into it with we have to have those just life altering things happen to us so we can actually appreciate the good that's coming and be able to clear the path for the good that is coming, right? And if it doesn't, so I know this is like difficult to talk about, but for some of us, we have planned an illness in our life, one for us to get through to struggle. But sometimes when that happens, our purpose, part of our contract, it's about the other people that are around you. My mom is one of them, with my mom being sick. She has her illness has touched so many other people in different ways. And so, even with people that have mental illness, cancer, any of that, say for instance, for your family, look at how much it has touched so many other people. And it may pull the rug out from underneath us, but we find the silver lining and we use it to help heal other people. So, even things that aren't directly our issue, if it's still really like our parents, we use it as a learning experience and a teaching experience. We've been there, we've been in it, we've done it. And then we go on and we write books. That's what we do. We write books, we make a movie, we share our stories, we step into who we were supposed to become.
We
And
meet other people. We hope to inspire them.
yeah, that's
We
what
do
it,
inspire them.
hmm
Let's
yeah,
speak that into existence.
yep. Yeah. And I loved what you were saying earlier too about like the um stop saying that my story isn't as big of a deal as yours. The root of it is everybody experiences trauma different. So somebody stubbing their toe, for instance, may seem minor to somebody else, but could give the person that experienced it like PTSD, right? We all
Mhm.
have a different view, we all have a different tolerance, and we all have a different thing it triggers within us. So I always say no story is better or worse than the other. It's how impactful it was for the person.
Yes.
And that's why we need to stop judging people.
And they land differently on different ears. I mean, even like let's look at something low stakes, something like a movie, a
Right?
fun little entertainment movie. I have
Mhm.
never heard of any movie being liked by every single person who's ever seen it. And
Yeah,
that's because every single person who's ever seen it is comparing it against their own life experiences and their own tastes and their own preferences. And maybe it's a movie they would have liked a week later, but it just hit them wrong this week.
right.
And that's been a hard lesson for me, the perfectionist, is that, for a long time, my target was how do I write this so that it'll appeal to everybody and it'll hit everybody just right. That's impossible.
It is.
It's not a real goal. So what I needed to do, and I think maybe a conversation with you affirmed this, was I needed to write it for me.
Mhm,
When I resonated with it, kind of imbue that faith in it and give it strength because of that.
mhm.
And I think, I now having done that, I can recognize in other works when I think that the author probably did that.
Yeah. People want to hear your story. The universe wants you to put your story out there.
You
They
have
do.
to allow that you are worthy of
Yeah.
being heard.
Hmm.
And I'm saying that about me, but that applies to other people. That
Yep.
apply obviously.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And allowing other people to see that the real, like I said, the raw parts of it, like the nitty gritty, that's the stuff that one people really want to hear, right? Because it's the stuff that's hidden from everybody.
Mhm.
All those things, because people don't like to talk about it, but that's what we all need to hear because we're all harboring it. And when you write it from the perspective of you, the universe automatically aligns the right people with you because they need that. They need the story. They need that for healing. So if you can make the shift out of I need to make everyone happy into I need to make me happy,
But
that's
everyone else being happy makes me happy. That's
yeah.
that's the trick.
Hmm.
But it's also there is a point where I often tongue in cheek call myself an escape artist, where like I will distract and pick new causes to keep from the internal work, from the inward eye. And yes, other people around me being happy will make me happy. But if I'm not learning how to make myself happy organically and authentically, it's just a distraction. And then that hole will have been dug deeper when I finally get back to it. And I will. We all will get back to who we are because at the end of the day, that's who's waiting for you.
Right. That's where we're all going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And like the making everybody else happy is such a loaded subject because we oftentimes feel like we are responsible
Mm,
for that.
hmm.
we have to do that. We have to make sure that this person's comfortable or, whatever. And the internal work is difficult, but it's also the path of the healer trying to make everybody else happy. You just have to learn how to use it right, whether you're a speaker, whether you're a writer, whether you're an energetic worker, whether you're flipping burgers and feeding people really good ass food, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all comes back to like that whole little bubble. It's just yeah,
And think about how you phrased it, right? Making people happy. Making,
force
forcing?
somebody
No. What you can do is provide the tools for other people to find their happiness or inspire their own happiness.
in
But
order
you,
to heal themselves.
yes.
That's how it all works.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, yep. What did Jamie say? She said, very inspiring, the growth and change, how you want to write your book. So it's not just heavy, but helpful for others. You're an amazing person.
Thank you, Jamie.
We're all excited. We're going to go out there. People are going to start, air quotes, healing themselves because of your inspiration, right? You're giving the tool, you're giving your story. This is your path. This is what you're supposed to be doing. I feel it in every inch of me. And
Mm-hmm.
even, I don't think this will be the last. Like you said, you have more of a story to tell. And it may not be necessarily in another book, although I feel like it probably will be. Um,
I,
I, oh, go ahead.
I no, I was just gonna say I've got stories in me that aren't sometimes the way I there's an author out there who I love who recently has been exposed as problematic and it's heartbreaking, but that author taught me that you can process your trauma through fiction too. And
Mhm.
so I've got these real stories I want to tell, but then there are these, like I said, where I've got fictional worlds I want to write where it's like a character study on basically an allegory for my mother. But
Mhm.
I want to make my mother the main character of this story where you've got a flawed protagonist and just what do they do in these fantastical situations. So I could wind up writing fictions too, and that sounds like a lot of fun to me. But
Yeah.
I think that this is the important work to do first, and then just go from there and see where my path leads me. I think if I was to write another nonfiction at this point, healing from workplace trauma and the idea of like, oh, what's that? The sunk cost fallacy. I
Okay.
think is where it's like a logical fallacy where you think because you've invested a lot in something, then you have to stick with it.
Hmm.
But that's a logical fallacy because it could just be a pit.
Right.
Getting out now might be better than getting out later, you know?
Hmm.
And kind of applying that to being grateful for the experiences you've had, but kind of like healing from that is something else that I know I'm not alone in. But that's a future project. That's not right now.
You follow your heart.
Yeah.
We're on this thing and you're gonna go on to bigger and better things. It's gonna be good for you. I think it's gonna be really great. And I think the moment you hit the publish button,
Yeah.
that's gonna be a big whirlwind.
Once I have this transcript, it's going to be a lot of work. One, emotionally, reprocessing it all word for word. I mean, I remember where I sat and what it sounded like and what I was. I mean, I don't think I remember what I was wearing, but I remember the looks across the aisle and the smell of the pew and everything. And so to go through this again and be like, oh yeah, they did say that. Oh my God, did I phrase it that way? Really? That's going to be hard work on its own. But then turning it into consumable, readable chapters is also work. And then once that's all incorporated, pitching it to publishers. So it's not like once this goal is hit, we're done, we're there. But this is the piece that I cannot do alone. And that's been a big acknowledgement too. Because I thought, did you hear me almost go to New York there? I thought that my journey to healing for a while there was learning how to be independent because some of the things that I went through happened because I was so dependent on people who were manipulating me. And it's kind of cycle breaking works on a lot of different stages. So yes, becoming independent and learning myself is part of it, but learning to accept that we are all in this together and that sometimes you do need that village to help you. You have a village has been healing too.
Yeah, definitely. And good people. Having a good village.
Yeah. And when you're good, you can see it.
Yeah.
It's like you can smell it in the air.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. And it's a good feeling. It's wonderful knowing that there are amazing people around you. It's part of the reason why I love like doing this stuff because it's good people. Y'all good people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to say or
I just noticed there's an ask in the chat to link my GoFundMe, my fundraiser. Is that best if I do that in the group, or where's the best place? It's called Bring Justice to Light, help fund the trial transcript. But I've tried keyword searching that. It's not the easiest to find. So I can provide the link
yeah, I
again.
can I'll post it in the
Mhm.
Janet's in the good grief. What is going on with my brain? She's in the Conscious Collective group, so I will post it in there. So, Janet, I'll tag you in that. And then, yeah, you're so close.
Mm-hmm.
So, so close. We got this.
Right now, I'm doing a little mini fundraiser too for people who don't like the appeal to emotion and they want something to show for it. So I'm doing, because it's been 8 years, I'm selling $8 snowflakes because I do little arts and
I
crafts.
love it.
And by my math, if I sell 150 $8 snowflakes, I'll be there. Like when you put it in that term, that's so close.
Yep.
We're so close.
And it's an 8-year anniversary. This is the momentum year.
Mm.
So there is no coincidence with that.
I
I
wondered if you knew something with the numbers.
Yep, this is a big year for it. Like this is okay, let's do it. So it's really cool. It's amazing. And then what follows that? The nine energy, which is completion, fruition, and letting it go and do its thing.
I'm getting my now it's my turn with the chills and the tingles.
Mhm. Yeah, I gotta do. Yes. So I will post the link in the group, and then wherever I post this elsewhere, I will also post that in there. It is on the GoFundMe. So if I can find a way to post it like on here so people can see it like on screen, I will. Yeah. And I want to thank you for jumping on and telling your story and talking with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh,
Um, Ironically, words fail, but just so much gratitude, truly. Hmm.
I'm excited for what the universe has done and brought us all together. So
Me
I'll be thankful every day.
too.
Every day.
What a good feeling.
Right? Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap it up for today, and I will post this for you. And yeah, I hope everyone has a really great rest of their Sunday, and I'll talk to you all later.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.